So the question is, how can we develop and equip kids that have mental problems, right? They have mental handicaps, and it's hard for them to learn things. It takes a little bit longer, or you need to have a different approach when it comes to teaching kids that are having some kind of difficulties mentally or even emotionally. So I'm going to teach you how the brain works first, so that you know how to approach this kid who's having difficulties in the brain, so that way you can work with the brain and not against it. Okay? So your brain works in images. If I said apple, all of you guys didn't see the word apple. You didn't think of the word. You didn't spell it out. You just saw an apple. As soon as I say apple, boom, apple comes up, right? Some of you saw a red apple. Some of you saw a green apple. Some of you saw a cut up apple. Some of you saw a computer apple, right? All I said is a word, and it triggered images. It triggered pictures, right? So your brain works in images. So the way that we learn, the way that your brain learns, the way that it gains information, the way that it retains information, this is how it goes. If you don't, even if you don't have a mental, learning difficulty, if you don't have that, if you do this, it'd be like a learning hack. It'd be a learning boost. It'll boost and accelerate your learning, your education, what you remember. It'll help your memory. It'll do so many powerful things because you know how your brain learns and retains information. So sight, that what you see, that what you say about what you see, and then your brain puts it into a site, a location in your brain to retain the information. So let me give you an example. If I'm talking to Thuo, I'm like, hey, remember that one place, Thuo, that we went to go get a coffee and a tea? Do you remember that place? Where was it? What was it called? And then what is he gonna do? This is what people do, and you guys have experiences like this where you're trying to remember something, right? And you go to somebody that was there. You go to somebody that will remember, right? So you go to them and you're like, hey, where was that place? Remember that one place that we went to? Where was that at, right? What was it called? What do they do? This is what they do. This is what they do with their face and their eyes. They go, what was it called, right? Why are they doing that? They're actually looking for the location that they stored that information in their brain. Where was it at? And then all of a sudden you'll see an image. You'll remember one thing about that circumstance, one thing about that situation, one thing about that place, right? Maybe you'll remember, a car in front of you. Maybe you remember what you were wearing. Maybe you remember the drink that you had. Maybe you remember a part of the conversation, whatever. But you see it. You remember it, you see it, and then all of a sudden all these other images come together. And then you're like, where is it at? Oh, I know where it's at. All of a sudden the whole story comes together, just off of one image. Your brain pulls up all these other files and all these other images and memories, and boom, puts together the memory, and then you recall it, you remember it. Let me give you another example of how I use this with my kids. Okay, so kids, and this is with learning, because my son was having a hard time learning in the beginning too. He was slower in learning things. He had difficulty. He would get frustrated. He would try, and he just wouldn't get it, and he would just get so frustrated and cry sometimes because he would really try and couldn't. So they had to memorize the planets for school. So my son was having trouble with this, so I sat both of my kids down and I taught them the planets like this, okay? In story form. With stories and creating images, so that way it's fun because it's a kid. You need to stimulate them. You need to keep their attention. If you're teaching them something about math or whatever, if you're just, teaching them with paper, with writing, that's gonna be boring. You have to make it fun. You have to get things that they can touch, they can feel, things that they can see, things they can imagine, things where it becomes fun. So you have to do that when it comes to teaching kids, period, especially ones that have, that they need more stimulation. They need you to keep them locked in because they have difficulty learning. This location, the site, that's where the information is going to be stored. And the way that you make that location stronger so that you remember longer is you create images that are more real. The more movement, the more details the images that you create, the longer you'll retain that information. So let me give you an example here. So I said, imagine, because I got to make it fun, right? Imagine one day you were bored. You were bored, you're just hanging out, and you're like, what am I going to do? And the cool thing is that you had special powers and you were able to fly, right? So you were there, what should I do? And you're like, I think I'm going to fly into the sky. I'm going to fly into outer space, right? And you had that superpower. So you're like, all right, I'm going to go to outer space. And you go, right? And you fly into space, and you're flying around, you're seeing all these stars, you're seeing the Milky Way. You're like, wow, and you're not bored anymore, right? And then all of a sudden you kind of get tired from flying around. So you want to go sit down. And you want to take a seat and take a little rest before you go back home. So you're looking, where can I grab a seat? Where can I sit down? And then, you know what you saw? I'm telling, this is how I'm teaching them, okay? You know what you saw? You saw this planet. And this planet, this is what it looked like. It had this ring around it. It was a planet and it had a ring around it. And you saw the ring was flat. So you're like, ooh, that's a good place that I can go grab a seat, right? So you went, you start flying over there. You fly over there to this thing, right? So I even drew pictures for him. Then you flew over there, right? That's him flying. And you saw this flat ring, so you go and you take a seat. This is you taking a seat on this ring. Now, what you didn't know is this ring was spinning. Oh no, it is spinning. So guess what happened when you sat down? Guess what happened? And then he's like, I began to turn. I began to spin. Yeah, you began to turn. So when you sat, you began to turn. And what is this planet? This planet is Saturn. Saturn, right? So this is Saturn. When you sat, you began to turn, right? So I created a whole story around this one world, this one planet, right? I created a whole story and these images in his brain, and then I told him this is Saturn. Saturn. So now he has all these different images to be able to recall that information. And still today, he remembers this. And this is years later. This is what I did. The next thing I said, okay, what about Venus? The planet Venus. When I say Venus, what do you see in your mind? What's the image? Because I want to help him to create an image around what I want him to learn. Okay? And the stronger, the more clear, the more detailed the image is, the longer they're going to retain that information. When I say Venus, what's the picture? What's the image that you get? And he said, I see a snake. I'm like, what? A snake? How do you see a snake when I say Venus? He said, because Venus. I said, oh, okay, all right. So Venus. So I had to give him an image, right? So I drew a snake. I drew a snake in the shape of a V with the tongue going sss, right? It's a snake in the shape of a V going sss, Venus, Venus. So I create a story, I create an image, a picture around what I want him to learn, and that puts it inside of the brain so that they can retain the information longer. So when you're teaching them things, help them to see it. Use your words to create images. Help them to experience it. Like the more fun that you do it, the more abstract that you do it, the longer that you'll retain the information.